All right, so this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to actually just go through School Interface 3. Now, School Interface has really been geared to the point, like a bunch of stuff has already been written for you here, and the idea is like, let's just figure out like what methods will go inside of each class and how the classes are going to talk to each other, how the files are going to talk to one another. So I'm just going to do School Interface 3 today, even though I know it's part of the classwork. Hopefully, you can walk through the thought process alongside with me. And then this will be a lot easier when you're going through it a little bit later. Once I'm done with this, I'm going to open a pull request so that you have the answer available to you. But please don't look at it until you then give it an honest effort on your own. If you haven't realized already, if you can't do School Interface 1, don't worry, because School Interface 2 has all the answers. If you couldn't do School Interface 2, don't worry, because School Interface 3 has all the answers inside of it. Same thing with School Interface 3 and 4. So the implementation I'm going to have today might be a little bit different from School Interface 4 exactly, but the thought process is exactly the same. You'll always have the answers a day after with the School Interface project, even though there are only 2 days left. So I'm here, I'm at Lima Platoon / School Interface 3, and this is just an object-oriented programming challenge. We're creating a command line interface here. So think about like when we were, well, at least some of us, when we were kids, like the library computer, green, black. I don't know, do you remember this when we were kids, when we went to something like that? I can't really read it. Library computers, 90s?
It was the Apple IIe.
There it is, something like this. Let's see if I can make, oh man, I can't make this any bigger. There we go. When some of us were younger at least, we had computers in the library that looked like this. It was a black and green screen, and then whenever we wanted to look up a book or something, we had to type in the exact number. And underneath the hood, I was always wondering, like, how is the computer so fast? What's actually happening here? It's more or less something like this. If the person presses 1, you're going to do something. If the person presses 2, you're going to do something else. But yeah, we're trying to build something like this. And with that, we're going to start School Interface 3. So currently, School Interface 3 lives at Lima Platoon, meaning that the entire folder here is part of Lima Platoon. And I don't want to alter that because 1, you don't have permissions. 2, I don't want to alter it's like George Lucas is saying, like, here's Star Wars 11 or whatever they're currently on. And this is my original manuscript. You're not going to alter it. You're not going to touch it because that's his original manuscript. What you're going to do is you're going to make a photocopy by pressing the fork button, forking it from Lima Platoon, from George Lucas's original thing. You're going to make a photocopy that you can use for yourself. The graphic shows up over here, and you'll notice that Lima Platoon changed to my particular username. At this point, I can do whatever I want to this. It won't affect the original, and that's exactly where we want to be. Now, it currently lives on GitHub, meaning it's on the web, but I need to download it onto my machine. Luckily, we've got this little green button here. We're going to do a Git Clone, which also just means download. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to create a new screen real quick. Stop share, new share, onto this. All right. So I've got my IDE over here. That's not a computer. That's not a terminal. That's a terminal, not a computer. Thanks. I was too young for that one. All right, so I'm here. I'm on my machine, and if I list out everything on my desktop, I've got Code Platoon, Curriculum, Personal, and School Interface 3 solution, just in case I get lost. So I've cloned down, I have the link right over here to clone down School Interface 3 from the web and bring it onto my machine. So anytime I have a git command, it's prepended with git. The command to download something from the web onto my machine is clone. So I'm going to do git clone and then pull this down. From here, I'm going to list out everything, and you'll notice that School Interface 3 is new. That shows me successfully that I've actually cloned this down from the web. I've downloaded it from the web and brought it onto my machine. I'm going to cd into School Interface 3, and I'm going to open everything inside of my current window of VS Code. And let's see where we're going to start over here. Oh my gosh, this is impossible to read. Why does anybody read this? I don't like this. All right, so we've got a readme.md file here. This is the readme that's on the web. And what you'll notice is that GitHub is going to actually read through MD, which is markdown files, and then create like a nice looking, it looks nice. This is what it looks like underneath the hood, and it kind of sucks. I don't want to read this way. So maybe I will right click here, and then I've installed an extension that you can find down over here at the bottom. If I go down to extensions, you can look up something called Markdown. And I believe it is, what is it? I think it's preview. Markdown preview. You can just grab that first one up here. If you type down Markdown preview, you can read this, and I can just right click, and then you can read it as you would read it online. This allows me to kind of like more or less stay in one window so I don't have to like go back and forth. So all right, so let's see. We've got school interface number 3, and we have the ability to list all the students right now. We can find a student if you type in their student ID, and then we have the ability to add a student. No, that's what we're going to be doing this morning, and we have the ability to break. So if I open up the terminal here at the bottom, and I list out all my contents, and there's my runner file. If I run python runner.py, well, it looks like this is going to fire off. And I have the ability to do number 1, number 2, and number 5. So I can list out all my students. This is going to read my CSV file, list out the student's name. Is this too small? Should I make this bigger? I need nods or shakes. Good, just in case. So number 1, I can list out all of my students. It'll list out their like a particular number, their name, and their school ID, and then it redirects me back over here. What would you like to do next? All right, so I can list out all my students. I can view an individual student by entering their student ID. So let's look up Kim. Kim is ID 34456, and there's a little bit of information about Kim. Kim is 31 with the ID number of 34456. And it doesn't look like I can add a student yet because that's where we're going to be going next. I can't remove a student because that's where we're going next. And finally, I can quit, and then it goes away. Before we get started, let's take a look and just read through all the code so that we really understand what's going on here. The runner.py file is the thing that's going to more or less run our program. So it says from classes.school import school. What's happening on line 1 here is that this is basically bringing in a module code that's written in another file and pulling it into this particular file. So what this is saying is from the classes folder, there is a school file. Inside the school file, there's a class called school. So you're going to import school with a capital S here because I'm referencing it, the school, capital S, the class on line 3. But I haven't written it inside of here, inside of this particular file. I'm importing it on line 1. So it looks like if I split right, I have a school, and I'm instantiating a new school with a name of Ridgemont High. So I've got the school, it's going to come over here, and it looks like school has a bunch of code that's built in. So I'm passing in a name into school, and I'm setting the instance variable on line 6. Self.name equals name, what I'm passing it here on line 5. There's a difference between the name on the right side of the equal sign on line 6 and the left-hand side of the equal sign on line 6. Name is a local variable. You'll notice that because there's no self dot in the front, meaning that its lifespan is only within lines 5 through 8. After lines 5 through 8, name doesn't exist anymore. I cannot call name inside of this method over here or this method over here. Name dies outside of here. Hence a local variable. But you know, the name that I give the school is something that's important, something I'm going to reuse over and over again. So whenever I feel like I'm going to be using this variable with multiple times within this class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put self dot in the front. What this does is it creates an instance variable instead of a local variable, so I can reference this in other places within the same class. Self.name, I can use pretty much anywhere else. Self.staff is the next thing that I'm doing here. So self.staff is equal to staff.objects. And it looks like I'm doing a bunch of different imports. All right, that's fine. Self.student, same thing, student.objects. I've got this method here called list students, and that's the method that's being called on line number 9. So I'm going to say, I have a while loop over here and basically saying, while it's true, I'm going to ask you to, what would you like to do? Would you like to list all the students? Would you like to view an individual, add a student, etc.? If you press 1, that's the input on line 6, then I'm going to ask the school to list out all their students. That method is just going to print out a new line, iterate over all of the students, and then print their just a number, their name, and their school ID. So let's jump into list students and see what happens. So we have for I student in enumerate student self.students. What this is doing is it's iterating over, it's basically doing a for loop over self.students. It's keeping track of both the student and the index that you're currently on. Self.students is created on line number 8. So let's just go ahead and figure out what student.objects actually does. I'm going to right click here, a little bit, a fun little tool that's built into VS Code. You can just right click and go to definition. And if it is defined, it'll just actually jump from the file that you're on into the file where it's actually defined. And there's that def object right over here. You'll see that the student.py file was actually created, was actually open. So it looks like a student. We're going to import the Csb module. We're going to import the OS path module. And from classes.person, we're importing person. Oh man, what is this? Okay, classes. Okay, let's figure this one out. So on line 1, I'm importing the Csb module, meaning that there is a Python library of Csb code. I'm going to be using that somewhere else over here. I'm bringing in OS path, which is operating system path. Somewhere I'm going to be using that here. And we have classes.person import person. So inside the classes folder, there's a person file. And inside of person, there is a class that I'm going to be bringing in. So if I look at person over here, a person has a name, an age, a password, and a role within the school. I am assigning instance variables to each one of them so I can reuse that after this method is executed, this init method is executed. And what's happening on line number 5 is that student is inheriting from person. There are things that the student has and the staff has that are shared attributes. So instead of writing all this code over again, self.name equals name, self.age equals age, and these 4 lines of code in both student at the top over here where line 8 is, and in staff also in line 8, like instead of writing 4 additional lines of code, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be importing the person class and inheriting from the staff, inheriting from the person class. So what does this mean? Inside of, we're just going to use student and person to start with. So person has all of these attributes, and student also has each one of those attributes. I could bring this here. Let me make this actually even so we don't have to go back and forth. Here we go. So the init here takes in a name, age, password, role, and school ID. What you'll notice is that these first 4 arguments are exactly the same. So instead of typing all of this extra code right here on line 8, because I could just copy and paste it, now I've got duplicated code because I know I'm going to be doing the same thing with staff. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to super. And super is a keyword for inheritance that basically says, look up 1 level. Look up 1 level. So instead of looking at student, I'm going to look up at person. There, super is basically saying, look up 1 level. So I can just essentially say person.init with name, age, password, and role. What this is doing is it's going into this file. It's going to be running through each one of these lines of code within student class over here. And then on top of that, after this super runs, after all these instance variables are set over here, I'm going to set self.schoolID equal to school ID. That's that extra thing that I added at the very end. And then at the very end over here, we got this method called Det Objects. I've got a students array. I'm going to be reading. I'm going to be creating a path. It's basically saying, like, this is where I'm currently at right now. This gives me the absolute path within my system. And then the path I'm looking for is, I'm looking for the data, which is a folder on the left-hand side here. there's a students.csv file. From there, what we're doing is we are opening that up, we're saving it as CSV file, we're reading every single line, and we're appending each row to the students array. And what you'll notice here is that there's this fancy like keyword arguments type of stuff. You could do the exact same thing a little bit differently, and I'm going to show you that in just a bit. Let's run this. And we're going to throw something called IPDB over here. I believe we went over this last week, and Tom might have covered it again, but IPDB is basically saying I'm going to stop the code exactly at line number 23, and we can evaluate everything that's going on. Let's see if this runs. So I'm going to clear my screen at the bottom. I'm going to run Python runner.py, and it blows up because there's no module called IPDB. All right, ignore this next section. For the people who actually want to know what's going on, I have a lot of projects on my computer with a bunch of different versions of Python. So the issue right now is that globally on my machine, IPDB is not set up, but if I try to install it, everything blows up. So what I'm doing instead is I'm creating a virtual environment. So Python make a virtual environment called virtual environment, and then I'm activating the virtual environment. And what you'll notice is that on the left side here, instead of having like my username flush against the left side, I have vend in front of it. What this is saying is that I've created a shell that goes around my entire machine, that I have a shell around this particular folder, and I can install whatever I want. What day was IPDB from? I think it was last Thursday. But essentially, we can go over it again. IPDB is a debugging tool. What's happening here is once I type in IPDB in this set trace here, it's going to stop right here. It's going to run through everything and just stop right there. So I clear it out right here, and I run Python. Not again.
John, is there any benefit to using that over VS Code's debugging?
Not particularly.
Okay.
Not everywhere is going to have VS Code, so that's the bad part. Some places might be like you have to use Sublime, you have to use Atom, you have to use Vim, and IPDB is a Python module, so you can use this and it will stop there everywhere. Versus if you are relying on the VS Code tools, but you don't have VS Code, then it doesn't work anymore. All right, so I'm going to run through runner.py, and then it stops me right over here exactly on line number 23. Let's take a look at what row gives me. So row gives me an ordered dictionary where the name is Lisa, the age is 25, and it gives me all of the things for the very first thing, the very first line of the CSV file. So if I go into students.csv, you'll notice that I take the first row and I merge it in with each student underneath it. So the name is Lisa, the age is 25, the role is student. You'll notice that over here. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I need to create a new student object, and I need to append that into the list over here. If I take a look at row and I translate, if I just kind of go little by little and I go dict row, I have an order dictionary over here. I can turn that into an actual dictionary. And then these two little stars in the front stand for keyword arguments, it's quarks. So if I just do, let's try dict row. I don't know if this will actually do anything. There's an invalid syntax error. But essentially what's happening here is that the student in the init file and the init method is looking for name, age, password, role, and school ID. What you'll notice here, name, age, role, school ID, password, where's the role? Oh, and role right over there. What the star in the front, this stands for keyword arguments. Essentially what's happening here is it's going to unpack the entire dictionary and pass it into here. It's going to look for particular keywords arguments, and it's going to look for the name, and then instead of passing in the entire dictionary, which is what we've got right over here, it's going to find whatever has the keyword, the key of name, and take its value and put it in its place. So underneath the hood of what's happening right over here is essentially it's going to be doing student with Lisa, age, Lisa, 25, student. And you can mix this up however you want. You can put age at the very end. You can put password at the very beginning. It doesn't matter. Due to the fact that they're keyword arguments, the * here is going to take it and basically just spread it across. It's going to match up name with name. It's going to match up password with password. You can have it in any order and do whatever you want there. How do I prettify the CSV file? I don't know. I might have an extension. I'll have to take a look. Rainbow CSV? Oh, thanks, Tom. That's exactly what's happening over here. So that's what the * means. It takes the row, which is an ordered dictionary, turns it into a dictionary, and then the * takes the keyword, the keys, and shoves its values at the very top here on line 7. With that out of the way, because I have 10 minutes, I magically need to cover all of this. Let's take a look at what we've got for this README. All right, so the very first thing that's going to happen is we're going to add a student, because right now all we can do is we do python runner.py. Oh my God, I forget to move it. There it is. All I can do right now is list all the students, view an individual student. I'm going to look at Jesse 1, 2, 3, 3, 5, and all I can do is quit. So I can only do number 1, number 2, and number 5. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take a look at number 3. I'm going to be able to add a student. So I'm going to just copy this code right over here, go to my runner file, and add in this other choice that people have. So some indentation. So I have the ability to list all the students, to find a student by their ID, and now I want to add a particular student. What are the things that a student needs? It looks like we need their name, their age, their password, role, and school ID. So if we're adding a student, we know that the role is going to be fixated as student, but we do need to get their name, age, password, and school ID. So those look like a few things I'm going to need, and it looks like we can take an example from number 2. Luckily, we don't have to do all of that. It's all already here. And let's just dump this in here. Fix up the spacing a little bit, pull this down. Let's change this to capital S. So what I'm doing is whenever anybody enters number 3, I'm going to create a object, a Python dictionary called that's set to role is equal to student, and we're going to set all the other attributes. We have name, we have age, school ID, and password. And then inside of the school that we defined on line number 3, we're going to create a method called add student with student data. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to jump over to my 3rd tab here, school.py. I'm going to create a method. I think it was called add student. This is an instance method, and it's going to take in a bunch of student info. And to begin with, I'm just going to do print student info, just to make sure that it captures everything correctly and then it prints it out to the screen. So let's see if this works. I'm going to clear it. Run the Python runner over here. What I'm going to do is I can still list all my students. I can still look up Lisa. And then now I want to be able to add a student. So when I hit number 3, and before I hit enter, it's going to come here. It's going to ask me to input the student's age, name, school ID, and password. The name, let's say I'm John. I am 12. My school ID is 123. My password is XX. And then it just prints it out. So we can see that we can successfully capture all of this information here. We pass that data off into add students. I'm going to right click here and go to definition. And since I defined it, it shows me over here. And let's jump back over to the README. All right. So, okay, our method's getting pretty crowded. We'll refactor the next challenge tomorrow. For now, let's finish up the functionality by going into school class, whatever. This method is going to create a new instance of a student object. and add it to the self.students variable. When you're done, run the program, enter some test data, and then make sure that you can list all the students out. All right, let's see if that works. So they said inside of school, which I just closed. Inside of school, I want to create a new student and append it onto the students array that I've got over here. Seems to be fairly straightforward. Student equals student, and I have all of the info, and using what I know from before, I can just do ** student info. And then I can just do self.students.append student. So I'm creating a new student instance, and then I'm going to append that student onto the students self.students array that I have on line 8. Let's try this again. Clear. Python runner.py, list all the students. I only got 6 of them right now. I want to add a student. John, 12, 1, 2, 3, whatever, 1, 2, 3. And if I list out all the students again, before you saw that there were 6. And now, when I run it, I've got 7. There's John. The issue is, when I run it again, John doesn't exist anymore. And the idea here is that we have students that exist within memory. So whenever I create this student, I append it onto self.students, it only exists within memory. Like, it only exists when I run this file, but doesn't actually persist anywhere. The data is not being saved. So I've got this students.csv file over here. It looks like I should just be able to save it to the very end. Let's like append this particular person at the very end so that they persist or they're saved into a file. Starting next week, we're not going to be using CSV files anymore. We're going to be actually reading and writing to and from a database. So that's actually how we store data in real life. But if you don't like CSVs, I don't know what to say, because CSVs are going to be around forever. The unfortunate reality is that CSVs will live forever because the business people that you're going to be working with always use Excel, and Excel always can transfer out into CSV. So they do a whole bunch of like weird business analytics on their Excel files, and they're going to be like, can you put all these people inside the database? And they're just going to give you like a giant database of like hundreds of thousands of rows, and then you have to write a script to do that. So CSVs are forever, and that unfortunately never changes. Let's go back to our README. Let's view it on the side here. So we're going to save our data. Yep. So we noticed a huge problem with our last program. We added students, but once we exited, all those data was lost. So we need to persist it, and we need to complete the add student method so that it loops through all the student objects and saves them to the CSV file. Okay. We could append, but it gets a little bit trickier when we have to start deleting rows. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically append the student. Where am I? I'm going to append the student to self.students, and then I'm going to overwrite the original CSV file. So I'm going to overwrite what we've got over here. And seeing as my voice is running out and people are antsy, let's take 8 minutes. We're going to come back at 9:05. So let's take 8 minutes, grab some coffee, whatever, and then we'll come back at 9:05.
Hi, John. Could I ask a quick question?
All right, we're back here. All right, so let's continue on. I'm hoping to finish this in like the next 15-ish minutes so that we can jump into personal finance and our Beyond Tech thread this morning. So I might go through this a little bit faster than I would like. So this next section that we talked about, if we go back to our school.py file, there's a method called add students. And as you remember from a little bit earlier, we have student equals, and we instantiate a new student using our keyword arguments, our kwargs ** over here. So we instantiate a new student. We add that student to the student.objects self.students, which is equal to student.objects, which is a list of all instantiated students. But once we quit, what we noticed before was we had John 1, 2, 3 as the 7th student in the list. But if you take a look over here, John 1, 2, 3 doesn't exist anymore, because whenever we closed the program, the data never persisted. It never actually ended up inside of students.csv, which is our quasi database for today. So what I need to do next is I need to alter this school.addStudent. And remember, it is the responsibility of a school to be able to add and remove a student. So instead of doing self.students.append student, at this point, we have to create another method to basically overwrite the original students.csv file. We could append one more at the very end, but once I start deleting and I want to like sort things, it gets a little bit more tricky. And this is just a really small program. So I'm just going to completely nuke this whole thing and then just rewrite it again. Now, the challenge for today does have you going over to CSV docs. And what I will tell you is the CSV documentation, the official documentation oftentimes is pretty bad and won't actually show you exactly what you want to do. So it's a good place to start. Sometimes the documentation will show you exactly what you need to do. And other times you're just going to need to Google around until you find the answer on Stack Overflow or a tutorial that somebody wrote ahead of time. I know that some people are like, I really want to understand everything underneath the hood when it comes to like CSVs and stuff. And like, what I will say is that developers of all levels are glorified copy and pasters from someone else who did it before. But with that, I will try to explain the best I can with this portion right over here. All right, so I'm just gonna copy and paste this section. This is from my solution. I did not magically come up with this on the fly. Let's go over every single line by line. So what I'm gonna be doing is I'm going to be opening the file relative to where I am. There is a, relative to when this whole file runs, this runner.py file runs, there is a folder called data. Inside of there, there's a students.csv file. I'm going to open that one up and I'm going to enter what's called write mode. So there are different modes that you have. There is the R, which stands for read. There's A for append. There is W, which is write. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be overwriting everything. I'm going to, once I open that entire file in write mode, I'm going to save it as file. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a set of headers. What you'll notice about these headers is that they're identical to the ones that we've got right up here. This is important for us because we need the headers, because when we actually read this, remember we took that row, which was an ordered dictionary, we turned it into a dictionary, and then we did the quargs argument to pass it into student up here. We need those because that's how we're determining which field applies to which variable name up here. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to create those headers and keep them the same as students.csv. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called a writer variable. I'm going to start writing to this particular file. So csv.writer is a method built into CSV that we imported. I don't know where did that magically, oh, I forgot to import. I have to import CSV because I was like, wait, I have CSV over here on line 28, as you see, but I was like, I've never defined CSV, so it must be at the top. That's where my import came from. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to start writing to the file. I'm going to write a row. The first row that I'm going to write is going to be headers. And then I'm going to iterate over every single one of my students, and I'm going to write a particular row. This first one, I'm always going to be rewriting I'm always going to be writing headers first. Then I'm going to be iterating over self.students, which now includes that new student that I created. I'm going to be writing student.name, age, role, ID, and then password. I have to do it in this particular order that matches up here. School ID goes school ID. Last one is student.password. So let's see if this works. So let's try this. Let's run Python runner.py. I can list all my students. There are 6 of them. I can still look it up. I'm going to look up 3, 4, 4, 5, 6, and I get Kim over there. Now I'm going to add a student. All right, so remember, let's take a look at the CSV file here and see if anything changes. I'm going to enter, student's name is John. John's 123, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What you'll notice is that on line 8 here, what happened really, really quickly, I didn't even catch it, was that the entire CSV file was wiped out, and line by line it was written until we got to John 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now if I list out all the students again, you'll see that there are now 7 students inside of there. Before there were 6. We ended on Doug, and now we're ending on John. So I'm able to successfully write to the CSV. Hint, hint, you're going to need this on your test tomorrow. So again, I'm opening that particular file in write mode, and I'm going to be writing the first line of headers, and I'm going to write every single row after that like this. It does need to be passed through as a, in my particular implementation, it does need to be passed through in an array, in a list.
Okay, quick. That was my question, John, is you said it's just for your implementation, but what is driving the need to pass that as a list? I'm missing it. Is that
That's a great
because?
question, yeah. There are many different ways that you can read and write to a CSV. I feel like the one that I found I found this solution online where it's just said, okay, you just need to, when you do write row and you pass it in like this, that's the way that you just have to pass it in. That's the implementation underneath the hood when it comes to write row. There are other
the right row method. Okay, I got it.
Other implementations where you can like create a dictionary and then of like name and student name and student age. And there's like, you can like merge those together. And there's another like write row method with a write row with like a dictionary. There's a bunch of other methods that you can use. I felt like this was the most straightforward, which was basically saying, I'm going to write a row. It's going to keep this particular order. Then I'm going to write a row and then it's going to keep this particular order. I felt like that was easier to digest than like merging a bunch of data together and then trying to mash it up with headers. There's another one where you can also turn on headers true inside the open file here. But then I was just kind of like, that might be a little bit much for some people. So I figured this was just
so you could get the headers. Yeah, you could get the headers back and then just pass them back in.
Yeah, there are definitely multiple ways of doing it. I felt like this was the most like step-by-step, which is like, let's write every single line by line. We're going to start with headers, then we're going to write every single row underneath that.
Got it. Thanks. And
So
that's still all part of CSV module. Okay.
That's all part of CSV module. So CSV module, again, what we've got here is we're opening the file and we're saving it as file. Then we're going to create a writer using csv.writer using this file. What this is doing underneath the hood is it's basically saying CSV is the library, has a method called writer. It takes in a file. And then when I create that, what I'm doing is there's a method called write row, which is basically saying, take this file, write to it, and I'm going line by line. I'm going to write the first row is going to be headers, and then every single row after that is going to be each one of the students that I iterate through. So I could also, if I wanted to, I could do like writer.write row of this is going to blow everything up, but let's figure out real quick. Python runner, I'm going to list out all the students there. So I've read it for the first time. This is exactly what I expect it to look like. Now if I add a student, I will list out all the students again. Oh, that does seem to work, but I do have that sucks at the very top. So I'm writing each row like one by one. So the first time I write the row, it says sucks, and then I write the headers, and then I write every single one after that. I thought that would blow it up. I'm concerned that it did not. Anyway, so I'm able to, if we jump back to our README, we're able to write to the CSV file. And then now let's do this thing where we're able to find our particular person and delete them if they're no longer part of our school. All right, it says, how did it know to skip the first line of the headers? Good question. So the question was, we're writing the headers over here, and then, so this is the first thing that gets written because that's the first time that write row, the method, is called. And then we're calling write row a bunch of times for every single student after that. When it reads it, what's happening here is when you do reader with dict reader expects the very first, I don't know why it didn't skip with the sucks. Generally speaking, with the dict reader, it takes the first row and saves it as headers and merges it with every single bit of data underneath it. All right, so we're back over here. We're going to be deleting records. We're going to basically say, like, if you're going to delete somebody and you enter their ID information correctly, we're going to find them inside of the student's CSV file, and we're going to remove them completely. So let's try that. I'll throw this at the very bottom. Actually, let's first run over to the runner here, and I believe this says follow the same procedure as before. Okay, let's just try this one out. So I know that I've got modes 1, 2, 3, and 5. I don't have mode number 4 to remove a student. So let's add that in. I'm just going to grab this whole bit, paste it in here, and change the mode to number 4. And then let's just say it looks like you would like to remove a student, and we only need their ID number to remove them. So let's change this up. We don't need all of this information. Let's say that we're going to create an input called student ID to delete. I'm going to do input, enter the student's ID to delete. So let's just see if this one works. I'm going to create a new method called remove student. I'm going to pass in student ID to delete. Remove student is part of the school class, but it doesn't exist yet. So I'm going to jump over here to school and just do def remove student. It's an instance method. It has ID to delete. I'm just going to do print ID to delete. So basically what I'm just trying to check is I'm just building this out very slowly. I'm going to be entering something into this particular runner file. It's going to pass it off to school remove student, right click, go to definition, and it's just going to print what I typed in. So let's see if that works. Clear the screen. Python runner.py. If I want to remove a student, enter the student's ID to delete 1, 2, 3. And it prints out right underneath 1, 2, 3. So we know that that's exactly where we want it to be. Just to verify that, I'm just going to do an F string. Remember, F strings are to basically be able to interpolate. Delete me, and I'm going to put this inside of curly braces to interpolate. So what this is doing, again, I'm just printing out the words delete me and then the thing that I'm wanting to delete. Let's quit out of this, run it one more time. Remove a student, 1, 2, 3. There's that delete me 1, 2, 3. So we're able to successfully capture what we've already typed in. And using that, let's change this at this point. So we know we have an ID to delete, and we have a whole list of students. And every single one of those students has a school ID. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to pseudocode because I have no idea what I'm doing. So I'm going to first iterate over the students in the CSV file. If ID to delete is equal to the student's school ID, remove them. And then at that point, save the remainder into the CSV file. I think that works. All right, so we're going to, I'm just going to keep this on the side here, and we're just going to copy and paste this because I know more or less I need it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the CSV file. I'm going to keep the headers there. I'm going to write the headers row. Now what I'm going to do is I have actually most of this already. Iterate over the students inside the CSV file. If ID to delete is equal to the school's student ID, remove them, which means I'm just not going to write them. So I'm just going to add a little if statement here. If student dot, I think it's school ID, is equal to ID to delete, I just want to skip. I don't know if skip is actually a thing. Otherwise, I'm going to write them into the CSV file. I don't think skip works here. Maybe there's a continue. Oh, okay. Let's just do this. Does not equal that. I'm going to move this one up, and that's it. That works for me. Let's see if this works. So let's read through this. All right. So I'm opening up the CSV file. I'm writing the same headers as I did before. I've grabbed my writer. I'm writing the headers. I'm iterating over every single student. And I'm saying if the student's school ID doesn't equal what I'm entering, then write it in. Otherwise, keep it as is. Let's see if this works. Clear. Python runner.py. I want to list all the students. I've got 8 of them right now. And I want to remove AWF. That's the ID right over here. So I want to remove the student with AWF. And if you jump back over here, you'll notice that AWF is actually gone. No longer exists within here. Let's remove John as well. So I'm going to room 1, 2, 3. You'll notice that I'm gone. But AWF also exists. Noticing an issue. Wait, John's there again. So what's happening underneath the hood here, if I quit at this particular point, I think what's happening here is that I think self.students is holding on to all of like the old stuff and it's rewriting into here. I'm not exactly sure. Not really sure.
Yeah,
But
that is the case because you're not popping the student off your student list.
Yep. So what I would have to do over here is because I'm writing. So when I am, let me show you exactly what's happening here. When I do python.runner, I listed all the students. I've got John 1, 2, 3. If I remove 1, 2, 3 and I quit, I'm pretty sure John goes away. And that's because I'm overwriting and I'm not removing like the students within the, okay. So when I remove John and I quit the entire program, self.students disappears because I exited the program. So it writes it and then it doesn't do anything else. If I continue writing it again, what happened a little bit earlier was that self.students still has John inside of it. So that's not exactly what I want to do. So this is a cheap way of getting around it, but I'm noticing a bug that's happening right away, which is self.students still has John within it, and that's not great. So let's do something different. We're going to do something similar, but I'm going to create a variable called, let's call this altered students equal to an empty array. And what I'm going to do more or less the same thing. I'm going to grab this here for student and self.students. I'm just going to grab this out of there. If student.school ID doesn't equal the ID to delete, then I'm just going to do altered students.append student. At the bottom over here, I don't need any of this. I'm going to do for student in altered students. That's it. Let me change a little bit of the spacing here.
You have a misspelling on your initial altered student.
Yes, I do. Altered students. Cool. So this is one way of going about it. Let's try this one more time. Python runner.py, list everybody out. We've got 6 students inside of there. Let's verify that's correct. I've got 6 students inside of here. It's on line 7 because line 1 is headers. Let us remove a student. I'm going to remove Doug, and Doug has a very long school ID. Doug disappears. And if I list out all the students again, Doug is still there. The reason behind that is because Doug still lives within self.students over here. But if I quit and reload, Doug no longer exists. All right, I have a question over here. Couldn't you just filter? Yep, that's exactly where I'm going next. I have the pseudocode over here. This is one way of going about it, and I was personally taught to write code in such a way. This is basically very, very explicit, helps out quite a bit for readability afterwards. So we've got for self.student, like I'm creating a for loop, I'm creating an if statement, and I'm creating exactly what I'm doing. This is one way of doing this. Another way of doing this is you could do altered students. I don't like this personally. So student or student in self.students if student.school ID does not equal ID to delete. Pretty sure this is the other way to do it. This is what's called a list comprehension. It takes all of this code and makes it into one line. Python people really like this. I understand it, I get it, I don't think it's any more performant, or at least noticeably performant than doing it this way on lines 38 through 41, but it is a way that you could do it. The last one that I can show you is altered students. There's a filter method. So let's go with this. Let's do this. There are 3 ways to write this. If you want to do this, that's fine, because this is how most other languages do it. You iterate over something, you have an if statement, then you append. This is fine. If you want to be more Pythonic, this is another way of doing it. Basically, I am doing for student in students. Okay, I'm going to keep the student for every student in self.students if the student's school ID doesn't equal ID to delete. This is another way of going about it. It's just a one-liner. And the last way to do it is this filter over here. So filter takes in a lambda function, which is an unnamed function. Basically, it's saying altered students is equal to a list, so we still have that the square brackets here. And filter takes in a lambda function and an iterable, which is something that you can iterate over. This lambda function is an unnamed function, which is basically saying keep the student if the student's school ID doesn't equal student, and every single one of, and the thing that you're iterating over and saving a student is everything within self.students. If this made no sense to you, maybe this makes sense to you, and if that doesn't make any sense to you, go ahead and do this. All 3 are totally legitimate. Yeah, all 3 are totally legitimate. All right, seeing as I'm running out of time, and this is a legitimate and working solution, I'm going to just keep everything as is. I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to run Git Status. These are the things that I have actually changed. So I could do git add space dot, but the issue with that is I also add everything within PyCache, and it's a lot of files. So if I run Git Status again, all of these extra things are being stored, and I don't want to push that all up to GitHub. But the issue is I've already added it, and that's the issue. That's the bad part about doing git add space dot. You add everything, but what if you don't want to add literally everything? So if I run Git Status one more time, oh my God, there's so many things. I don't want any of this virtual environment stuff. I think they tell me how to undo that, but crap.
Yeah, they do up at the top. But
it's at the top, but I can't scroll that far up.
Git remove -- staged.
I usually just do git reset.
Yep. Git status. Git reset will basically just undo the thing that you just did. And I only want to add the classes school.py and the runner file. I don't want to add the difference in the CSV file. So I'm just going to be very specific. And this is why I tell people don't do git add space dot. Git add classes, tab school, git add runner.py. And if I run git status one more time, you'll see those turn from red to green, meaning that you've added it to what you actually want to commit. At that point, you do git commit -m. You put a little message saying finish this challenge or something descriptive. And then I'm going to do git push origin master. And luckily, my origin here is not pointing towards Lima Platoon. It is pointing towards my own repository. I can check that by doing git remote -v. And you can see that when I do git push origin, origin's actually just like a variable name for this particular link that comes right afterwards. Now, let me stop sharing and share another screen. Now back over here. And I want to create a pull request. I'm going to click on the pull request button, click the green thing that says new pull request. And what I'm doing here is I'm saying that on JYoung217, there are changes that I've made at master that are different from Lima Platoon's master. Specifically, I've added these things in green. And I think that's all I need to do. So I'm going to do the create pull request here, create pull request, and you'll notice that before it said 0, and now it says there is 1 pull request. If I were to go through this and actually tear it apart myself, I see that import CSV, that's fine. Add student info, this is okay. What I notice is that this method and this method are identical, with the exception of what you're passing in. So I don't like to have repeated code. So I'm going to say, find this with line 46. factor into a new method. Probably a save method would be useful. The save method takes in something to save and the name of the file, and then you can rewrite that. I would remove the pseudocode, but I'm just leaving this in there for you. These are other ways that you can iterate over the iterate over the students to get the altered ones. And this is what I'm entering over here for getting the student information in the runner file. All right. I would stop for questions, but I have to go over this personal finance beyond tech. With that, I will stop recording and we'll move on into that.